In this video, I'll be creating a dialogue system, creating interesting levels, making more enemies, and more. So stick around to find out about it. If you don't know what Blobs Dices is, it is a turn-based strategy game that was made for a 48-hour GMTK game jam, where a roll of the dice determines how many moves you will get, the damage of the moves, and what the enemies will do. The first thing I did this week was create a dialogue system, so I spent a few days working on that. I have two scriptable objects that hold the speakers and the narratives. The speakers are used in a narrative as well, a speaker. The narratives are the objects that will manage the dialogue's properties. Speakers will have a name and an image that is shown in the dialogue, so I can create a speaker for the player and have the player speak during dialogue. Now, the dialogue manager takes in a narrative and creates a box with the corresponding text inside of it automatically. It also comes with a button to advance the dialogue. This is what the template of it looks like. The text is also animated with a typewriter effect, and if you press the next button before the typewriter finishes, the typewriter will auto-complete and the narrative step will not be advanced. This dialogue system has some nice amounts of flexibility, but I will improve it later in this video. Now, about levels in the game. This is not the first time I'm redoing everything. Not the second time, but the third time. So I should probably plan out the levels and make them interesting. In this third iterations, the levels will each be places on the world map or major events that have happened. Here are some examples. My planning document only has levels planned until Frosted Tundra, but I'll keep adding on to it. Most of these levels will have a purpose, and I'm avoiding adding filler levels as much as possible. This means that there will be fewer levels, but they will all be higher quality, and the introduction part can be condensed into smaller levels. For example, level 1-1 and 1-2 both introduce more than 2 new blobs that are functionally distinct, allowing for more variation and strategy in the later levels. Since all of the levels are going to be based on the map, each level will have a different artwork, as I cannot just reuse the same map texture for each level, which is what I have been doing previously. So I created a new field in the level object to allow for decoration. So each level can have a background sprite, a foreground sprite, and decoration sprites. These decoration sprites don't have to be visual only. I could add flowers that give health when you click on them, though I would have to introduce that through the dialogue system. To fill in the new levels, I created a few new enemies. The newest completely new blob is the botanist blob. The botanist blob cycles between an attacking move and a supporting move. So it goes attack, support, attack, and so on. But there are two different supporting moves for it to choose from. It decides that based on the dice roll. If the dice roll is low, it does A. But if the dice roll is high, it does B. The lumberjack blob also got reworked. Instead of dealing just a high amount of damage, it now deals an increasing amount of damage. Leaving it alive for 4 turns will make it deal around half your HP if the player is unprotected. There are also some other small tweaks, but those aren't important. Mainly, most blobs will now not be able to die in 1 hit of strike, and formerly weaker blobs will pose more of a threat. After that, I had to remake the text animators, so instead of doing it my own way and updating the text string every frame, I would use the built-in function made for this exact purpose. The reason I decided to remake the text animator was so that I could animate the individual characters differently and allow me to shake specific characters and make other cool effects. Since I was using Text Mesh Pro and it already had some text modifications using rich text tags, I decided to mark the animated characters with these tags to, well, keep consistency. The plan is that I mark the text to be animated with tags. So for example, the tag for a shaking piece of text would be open tag, shake, close tag, and open tag / shake close tag. But after looking through some online forums, I found that I couldn't have this because hiding the tags would require me to edit the source code. So instead, I used the link tag that was built into the package. It basically works the same, but I cannot stack tags onto each other. Not that I would need some text to both shake and wiggle. Now, to actually make the text move. It was quite confusing to edit the vertices because there wasn't an official guide, but thanks to a tutorial by Campbell Software, I managed to do it. Using their code as a base, I changed and added some parts and successfully made a shake effect. Next, I also made a wave effect, and here are the results with the text animator. to add a little more emotion to the speakers, I made a system for dialogue particles. Each part of the narrative will now have a field for a speaker particle. So if there is a part where a character speaking is annoyed, I can add some frustration particles. To be honest, it took me much longer than I would want to admit to spawn UI particles at the correct place, even though I already had functions for that in place. Now, the new dialogue system would be quite useless if I didn't have any important things to convey to the player, so I drafted out a rough storyline with my sister. The story starts with the player waking up in the lab, which has already been shown in my latest 2 devlog. The player then makes their way out of the lab, where they reach a walkie-talkie. A person which is a scientist in hiding on the other side of the walkie-talkie then tells the player something that sets them up on a quest to defeat the blobs. There will be a final boss fight with a king blob, and that is basically the entire story. The scientists will guide the player on their way to the king blob by telling them which direction to go, which is just an explanation for why the player will never get lost. But the scientists will also tell the player about how some of the blobs work, as I don't expect you to know what these 16 symbols mean. So the first encounter of the lumberjack blob would look like this. This segment is rather short for its importance, but I wouldn't want to give too much away, and it's all subject to change. The last thing I did in these few weeks were adding new moves for the player to use. I looked through most of my pre-existing moves and found out that there are only 3 moves that were able to deal enough damage. All of the other moves just inflicted status effects. So in order to fix this, I added many more moves that could be used to win. For example, Vengeful Strike, which deals more damage the less health you have, Soul Strike, which can deal high amount of damage to a few blobs, and Meteor Strike, which can deal damage in a line. Most of these newer moves have upsides and downsides, which make them more unique from one another. But in order to keep them relevant, I had to change some of the existing moves. So now, Strike deals much less damage when the dice roll is high, and Crush deals much less damage. However, Dragon's Breath deals more damage to compensate for its weakness, and Smash is more damaging and costs less. When I was creating these new moves, I played with the concept of having splash radiuses, but since the position of the enemies were now determined by the level, these moves would be very inconsistent from level to level. My solution to this problem was to create a new move, Tempest Tornado. Tempest Tornado drags in nearby enemies, letting you take advantage of moves with a splash radius, such as Meteor Strike, making for a powerful synergy. This is what I've managed to achieve in these few weeks. If you enjoyed the video, you can subscribe and check out other devlogs on this indie game.